Well, welcome everyone to the Your Brain Shift podcast, where we explore topics that promote mindset shifts and brain shifts for greater success, health and wellness, and fulfillment. My co-host Kevin McKinnon is not able to join us today. Our guest today is Janelle Lynn, a holistic health coach and an integrative wellness expert. So welcome to the podcast, Janelle. I think to maybe set a little bit of background, what got you into your area of expertise?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. So I bring about 20 years of experience into the field, and what got me in was my own, as most of us do walk into the health field or health and wellness, is my own experience as a young mother and woman. Had allergies terribly. It seemed like I was allergic to everything. And really my quality of life was something that I was interested in improving. And that's really what drove me into it. I started out as exploring herbalism and became a master herbalist, which led me into nutrition. That brought me into functional nutrition. It is one of the most alternative pieces that comes alongside the medical community. And so that was just such an exciting time because I saw the biggest changes with that. From there, as I was practicing in cancer nutrition, was kind of how I started in that field. It was kind of big and heavy, but that opened the door for a lot of mental chaos, like mindfulness, and such a big piece of healing. From that, I walked into the spirituality, or getting to know your soul self, your true soul self. So there's been this, I'd like to say full circle, but I always look at it as an upward spiral in the healing process and the holistic person. So I use the wellness wheel, or the circle of life, in my practice a lot and with my groups, because we can look at everything from all of these aspects. And it's just been this incredible journey. I've been fortunate with amazing mentors, and boy, I'll tell you, every level up for me it's almost like you're starting over, but it's a lot of fun. It's hard, don't get me wrong, there's challenges, but being able to identify those and work on them, just finding that humility in living here. So
yeah, I love that metaphor of a spiral. I was kind of introduced to it by Ann Wilson Schaaf in her one of her salient books, Women's Reality, that all our development is a spiral, and it starts out as a wide circle, and then it goes narrower and narrower and narrower, but it's a spiral journey. And then sort of parallel to that is that it's never linear. It's not this straight line that will go up, have some progress, drop back, sometimes regress, or it's this more of a sawtooth climb than instead of a linear one. And then more importantly, it's a process and a journey.
It absolutely is. And I have found, being able to look back, that, each stage of life, it sounds funny looking at it from before, and I started in my 20s, and now as I'm in my mid 50s, I'm looking at it with such a different perspective. And absolutely, that sawtooth is all the way through. So when you think that the journey is there's never a there. It's always progressing. It's kind of like you get to have, they're not really plateaus, but they're these time frames of enjoyment, and and then the universe kind of brings it all back to you and says, well, where are you now? And
it gives us a nudge further.
Yeah, it's the excitement piece is where I think creativity happens. And so being excited about where you are, even if you're not where you think you want to be, is it's great. It's a great process for growth.
Yeah. One of the themes that my host and I kind of introduced in the last episode was the concept that we all live in various environments or containers, whether that be family of origin, our culture in our city, or even for that matter, as granular as one side of town versus the other side of town. Certainly, state and national containers influence us. And we're kind of exploring Marshall Goldsmith's insight that those containers actually are environments that shape us and shape our behavior, our choices, and so forth, usually unconsciously. And that if we're not aware of that influence and also make efforts to create and control our own environments, that it has a huge impact on our success, well-being, health, fulfillment, and so forth. So in the loose container of that concept, tell us about your programs and your experience with that concept.
Yeah, so using the framework of the circle of life, it's also called the wellness wheel. I've seen it stacked as well. And bringing that alongside the map of consciousness, these containers, especially now in the time we are, health in the time of, we'll say that change, health in the time of change. We are almost forced to be brought inward. And one of the things that's happened in the last 10 months in my practice, as well as in my personal life, is looking more inward and how that impacts me every day when I wake up. What am I looking at? It was the container that I'm in on a daily basis, and where are things that maybe I'm not as happy with, or I could provide change. So a lot of that is morning routine, thinking process. What are we motivating ourselves with? Because that container, as you're talking about, can be self-liberating or self-imprisoning, depending on what you're thinking about. So if you're waking up thinking about, today I do these little 1-minute moments on my Instagram, and not every day, but I try every day. And we talk for a minute just about one concept or one thought process that you can explore or change kind of throughout your day. Today was looking at the 6 natural doctors, right? Things that are primarily free to you, like sunshine and water and light, exercise, eating good healthy foods. Those are choices. I know we have to purchase them, but they're still our choices, and how we rest and regenerate. So within our own self, without getting into so much of measuring and functionality, how do we impact our day so that we can bring our best self forward, or the person that we are or we are becoming? Because we're always changing and growing. Within that, I look at personally, where am I constantly stimulating that intellect? Like, what groups am I participating in? Whether it's currently, we're not really having groups where we meet physically, which I think is really important because of that social aspect. But externally, what are we bringing into our container, and how is that impacting and affecting us? So I have a few groups that I belong to, but in my coming to the end of the year, we're just under 30 days out from the end of the year and new, rebirthing of the change. So who am I allowing to influence or participate with me in that? And this is where I go into social media and kind of do a detox. Like, do I need to belong to that group, or do I want to be seeing those things coming across my peripheral vision, whether it's whatever that media is? And how, when I do receive it, do I feel about that? Because the triggers, I think you mentioned that in our pre-chat, the triggers can be huge right now, and that impacts our expression in our relationships with those people the closest to us. So I think this is a time where the triggers are very big right now. We're very sensitive, and one of the things that we look at is how do we take a breath in through that and look at being responsive versus being reactive. So when we talk about this from a program perspective, after our last meeting at the summit, the stress resilience is important. How do we take, as my topic was, how do we take the negative, or how do we take the opportunity to change stress into our ally? And that was such a big piece. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to go over and express that. Finding the platform so that we do have a jumping off place every day, I think is really important. And that's where the integrative wellness comes in, because you can make a change whenever you want. Like, you always have a choice. It's just what you can see your choices are.
Yeah, for our listeners' benefit, the summit that Janelle's speaking to is we collaborated along with 17 or 18 other wellness professionals for a total health summit last year, which you can find online. I love that concept about the 1 minute focuses every day. It's a great way to facilitate shifts and not only mindset and behavior changes, but get more sustainable results, is to focus on simple, small steps that I can take action toward where I want to be. Because change can be challenging, as you mentioned. It can be overwhelming. And at a biological level, our brains hate change.
Yeah, we're very resistant.
Patterns. So one way to get to Mount Olympus, so to speak, is to shrink the change and take these small actionable steps, even if it's just, drinking a healthy beverage instead of one that it isn't for my biology. And it's those little dopamine hits that we get when we accomplish those small incremental steps that motivates our brain toward that greater outcome or intention that we desire. So that's a very powerful tip that you shared about the daily little mindset.
Yeah. And they're as beneficial for me as they have been. As soon as I think, is anybody really listening? I get so much feedback. I don't know what it is. It just kind of just shows up. It's that affirmation of process, I think, and I'm grateful for that. But they're tiny seeds sometimes that, for some of us who have gone through time of change, like one of the things I'll tell I have classes that I teach and I coach, and I'll just remind people, it's not that I'm doing things better than someone. I just am doing them longer. I've been doing them longer over time. So my success rate, if we want to identify it as that, can be a little bit different because I've had longer exposure. I've made different commitments. So these little moments became seeds for me. I've always had people come back over the years and say, well, that one thing you said. And I was like, well, what was that one thing? What was the one thing? And then it just kind of took its time, and it was that seed that was planted. And I think that's true for a lot of us. We may not take action immediately. However, over time, and sometimes that exposure continues to grow and it becomes very organic. And I think that is such a huge impact for change, is the organic aspect of it, that it's growing within you.
And speaking of seeds and organic, if you think about the way nature functions, that a seed is the start, but the harvest is never forced. Even if I'm the farmer, I got to put the seed in the ground. I got to provide the right environment, the water, the nutrition. If it's something being grown indoors, the appropriate sunlight and so forth. But there's this natural rhythm and timing to the end result that I want. I don't have the control of how quickly the plant grows, when it flowers and fruits and then produces a harvest. Most of our behavioral changes are on a similar journey. We have to plant the seed. We have to provide the right environment and nutrition for it to eventually harvest and produce what I want. And circling back to what one of your shares were a moment ago, is the group environment that I'm in is critical to that. Am I in one that supports it, that's congruent with my values that I'm
alignment.
trying to
the alignment.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, and that brings us back to the container that you were talking about, and I'm excited. I'd like to go in, and I have not read that book yet, but it will be on my list. Yeah, the environment, and this was one thing for me. I went into at the beginning in March. I decided to work on a kitchen gardening program for some of my clients. So garden coaching is one of those things right now that I've slid on into my practice, because people want to be able to provide healthy, nutritious foods for themselves and their families, as well as pantry prep and, things like that. Those are very touchstone things that they can be in control of in their own home. So this environment that is being prepared, you're not always in control of it, but you can have an influence. And I think that's an important factor. It's being connected to nature. It's allowing the whole self to be involved, because you are thinking, you are feeling, and you are taking action. So that's, will and heart and head all together. And that being connected really works in that holistic or wholeness that we're really driving for. So yeah, it's great. I think it's great. And I think what I'm seeing with a lot of my clients is they're feeling disconnected from their lives, or with so much change so quickly. And so their environment is something they may not have paid attention to right in front of them, and now they are, whether they're doing decluttering or home improvement, or self-awareness work, which now we start to get into things that are very visceral.
Yeah. And that we can make small changes to that environment, especially when it comes to holistic foods or natural foods, that we don't have to be farmers, so to speak. There's very simple things you can do, like that head of romaine lettuce that you're about to finish up. That little bit of inner core that's still there, is save that. Don't eat it or throw away. You can put it in a little glass with a 1/4 inch of water, and it'll continue to start growing.
I know, it's amazing. You're like, how did that happen?
Yeah, how did that happen? Or that onion top that you cut off, do the same thing. Put it in a little bit of water, damp paper towels, and it'll still continue to grow. Greens that you can harvest. There's all kinds of ways. Microgreens are another one. Just sprinkle seeds on a flower pot or whatever, and harvest those for a sandwich or salad and so forth. And participate in your own food production and wellness.
And it's very
small
simple.
steps. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is your eggshells, just sustainability. Not everybody has a yard, but even in a city setting, small container gardening, food prep, these are very simple things that you can make changes to. And the opportunities here, because most of us are home now, and so that food prep is kind of important. It's a discovery process too. What do you like? What do you not like? The seeds are amazing. Also with the herbs, I started to grow my own ginger, which I'd never had.
It's a
As an
fascinating plant to
herbalist.
grow too.
Yeah,
That big
I'm like,
tuber
put
forms
that in
from this
water.
tall, skinny leaf and stalk above ground. Yeah,
And they're pretty. Some
yeah.
of these things bring oxygen in. If you're having things in your home or in your kitchen, they bring in a
Mhm.
cleansing process to the air that's circulating in your home. I am not an advocate. I shouldn't say that advocate. I'm not a fan of conditioned air. I prefer to have my windows open, temperature allowing, of course. But when the conditioning is running in the summer or in the winter time, a lot of times air quality is such a challenge if you have pets, or depending on your hygiene, your cleansers with the chemicals in them. Like, these are all things from an integrative perspective that we look at kind of on a flower wheel of where your health is. And I look at this as a framework, a baseline of assessing your health. It's not just about looking at lab work, because that's the internal telling us what's happening externally. But what the environment, we're back to the environment or the container that you're living in on a daily basis, and how it's supporting your health and wellness, your thinking process. Because when we have brain fog, we just get kind of lost in there. And then that combined with the mental chaos that sometimes happens, that inner chatter constantly. And then, we're just we end up, what I see a lot of is just sitting in front of TV and, just kind of tanking it for the rest of the day, when there's just so much opportunity for connection.
Yeah.
But we went from kitchen garden all the way to
How important that connection is to you brought that concept of the groups that we mingle in and so forth. A little bit more challenging right now because of the physical distancing that we need to protect ourselves and others, but certainly doable. There's so many ways you can connect online, not so much through social media, but there's a lot of free video conferencing opportunities and platforms out there. And the conscious choice of who we mingle in group with is important. I always loved Jim Rohn's insight from the 50s of you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And the add-on to that is choose wisely, because there's actually science behind it. Our mirror neurons will fire, and we actually pick up the behaviors of people we spend the most time with, whether that's healthy habits or unhealthy.
Absolutely. And you'll see that in the smaller community groups. We live in a pretty small town in Northern California, and even within the town, you can see how those containers are working. Within that group, whether it's conscious or unconscious, or even subconscious. It's kind of over in your field there. And one of the other things is, what are we reading? Like, the reading material, and that concept has always been with me once I started on this journey. I was very fortunate that the big company that I worked for at the time had a library. And one of the goals that I had set was I would read one book a month. I would watch, at the time, they were still videos. Now I'm sure they're on some, like actual video cassettes.
Right. Yeah.
Moving into CDs. Yeah. And then I would listen to one series of, Brian Tracy was kind of big then, Earl Nightingale, the series is that were out there, moving into Joseph Campbell. And so once a month, I would go into this development process and experience it in different ways. So when we talk about that stack of books next to your bed, if there's still books, I like to read paper still.
Yeah.
I like to be able to touch it and absorb the words that way. But listening is always, and that's kind of a newer thing that I have found. But it's different because what I listen to is more or less podcasting, or the way the stories are coming out. You really get a different connection to the person that's telling it or that's being interviewed. So it's
Yeah.
kind of amazing where that technology really can bring us upward.
Absolutely, a whole wealth of opportunities there, whether it's YouTube videos, podcasts, audiobooks, you
Yeah.
name it. But again, being selective and choosing what's working for us and benefiting us is one of the simplest stress management tools we have is turning off the evening news.
Yeah.
Because that's a source of triggers at so many levels. Not that we are totally isolated and don't keep up with what's going on in the world, but we have to recognize those news containers are trying to fill 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year with content. And a lot of it is just not serving us and quite often triggers because they know the science behind setting off the alarm bells.
Right.
It serves the advertisers, and then we're medicating our
Sure.
with solutions that maybe don't necessarily serve us. Serves their bottom line, but not necessarily our health bottom line.
It's really true. I kind of look at it in the body, mind, soul at work containers. So we've got the wake me up, the discipline aspect, and this is really physical body. This is also your time spent in front of a TV. I can't remember the last time I actually watched the news. As my husband and I, we talked about, I said, if we just disconnect enough, the information will find us if it's that important. And I mean, remarkably so, someone comes and knocks on the door. You have to hear this. I mean, it's not often we have a lot of people just, randomly knock on the door. It's not that they don't come over, but not just, hey, I got to tell you this. So it's always going to show up somewhere in your day. Yeah. So that discipline, wake me up, and then we've got the intellectual kind of light me up. And then we move into that intuition or fire me up, that passionate piece. And those containers are really when I'm looking at personally and professionally where I'm trying to help people discover what that is for them and how they enter whatever part of the process it is. Because, the wake up has been around for a long time, or the awareness or the great awakening. And we're in that process, but I always think we're in that process. So how you choose to define it, which I think is another container, the definition, and how much effort you choose to put into that. You will have this much time in a day, and what do you do with that time? How do you organize that time? And are you even aware that you have the choice to organize that time? You were talking about that earlier, the awareness piece of, what we spend time with. I'm a personal trainer, and also we have a brick and mortar gym, and so we encourage people an hour a day, spending time working on your physical health, this physical exercise piece, not just exercise, nutrition, and stress management, those big three again. And you should, this is in my opinion, but what I've seen work really well is spend that same amount of time on the intellectual piece, on the learning side, on the growth mindset, as well as then spending that same amount of time, roughly, on your spiritual growth or your soul development. And, years ago, a good friend of mine, her brother was a priest, and this is one of those things he instilled in me. I was fortunate enough he was able to baptize my first child, and we were pregnant together. This girlfriend of mine our kids were born around the same time, and so we went through this experience together. And his insight was really this: if you can spend that amount of time with your spiritual growth and connection, it's so beneficial. And he's since passed for a number of years, but this is one of those things for me that wow, like it's not just about whatever your spiritual practice is, it's about your participation in that, as well as just, being physically present. I was actually raised Catholic. It's been a long journey of, finding what my spirituality is, not just in a religion. But those three things together, that's 3 hours a day. If we were just going to randomly take a time amount, 3 hours a day that we have, and then putting everything else in there, as part of your life, does that fit? And a lot of people are like, oh. But it's possible when you just rearrange a few things. So
yeah, and set priorities and choose activities that are congruent with our values, and avoiding and eliminating the ones that are incongruent.
yeah.
I like those. I mean, back to the containers metaphor and environment is, what are the containers or environments that are going to support body, mind, and spirit? As humans, we have those three aspects. And I always loved Jonathan Field's practical wisdom and application of containers, and that was think about daily of what your what he created 3 buckets: vitality bucket, connection bucket, and contribution bucket. And every day taking 5 minutes at the beginning of the day and evaluating which bucket was depleted at this point, and that you needed to focus on filling on that particular day, and then concentrating on at least 1 or 2 activities that would do that. Because if our vitality bucket isn't full, if we're not taking care of the body and the mind, so to speak, we're not going to have the energy to for connections or contribution, and that all 3 of them were important. If one was drained or depleted, it was going to impact our life significantly, 2 or more, and then you're in deep trouble. And how important it was to mindfully each day choose activities and deliberate steps that were going to maintain the balance in those 3 buckets or containers.
Right. And I believe we've definitely come through this transition where a larger amount of society is aware of that. I think that's part of that awakening process, that we are in control of that. And so it's our job to take care of those things, instead of expecting it either just to be perfect or someone else to do it for us. I think just generationally, there are some things that have changed over the years. But this radical reprogramming, we sometimes feel like we need permission, because why do we cut the ends off the pot roast?
Yeah, I love that.
It's always been done like that, but we can change it. The only reason that ever happened was because great-great-grandmother
did it so it fit in the pan, yeah.
The pan was too small, yeah. So there's a big difference, and that can be considered this radical reprogramming of changing those routines that maybe they no longer actually serve us. So we are, again, not in alignment, as you were mentioning before, with what our greater purpose is there. So we get stuck, and that creating that inner alchemy, that change, it's so satisfying and fulfilling. And I think the joy comes from that. And even in a time when there's just so much resistance and so many perceived challenges, no one ever said they were positive or negative. So how do we put our spin on that?
Right, yeah. Because change is the only constant in life. All we have to do is look to nature for that one. And the stresses come from our resistance to those changes. Circling back to the conscious choice around choosing the buckets or the path that we want to our own fulfillment and empowerment, is we have a lot of freedom, and only we can define what those are.
Sure. Right. That's true.
Empowerment with that compared to maybe our ancestors that were more survival driven. You know, we no longer have to forage through the woods to find food and shelter, et cetera, and the fundamental survival needs that were once the major part of people's day in our ancestors' history. At least in first world countries, we have a great deal of freedom of
We do.
choice
And resources.
and resources to boot. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of that knowing. I always kind of look at it as it's really about you connecting to the deeper truth of yourself. And I do think that's a lifetime journey, because, you know, recently had a friend who passed, and he was very inspirational, and he always, you know, knew that his time here was limited. We all have limited time. So what am I doing with that time?
Yeah,
And
one of the gurus I follow, he says we're all pop-ups.
Yeah.
We pop into existence and we pop out at existence. And in the grand scheme of timing in the universe, that's a very small window. And it is a mindset shift, like, okay, what am I going to do with that little window of time that I'm here and then not here? Right.
And what did I do? That, I think that's one of the places that I am in my life, is what have I done with that time, and not as a judgment of my reflection, good or bad, but as okay, if I've done that, negative or positive, right? What am I going to do now? And what am I going to do with the time that I have left? Not that I have to plan. I'm not the biggest planner, I should say. I kind of like to go with the flow. And in a new program that I've written this year is called Live, Love, Grow. And it's really 6 weeks of looking at what is the live part, what are our belief systems, and how do we apply those in our daily life. And the love piece is, you know, how do we feel about ourselves and everything around us, and how do we embody this vibration of love, which is really the highest vibration of bringing everything in this life. And we are each our own universe, and then we are part of a greater collective. And the growth part is really, what do we do with that information, and how do we, you know, how do we create a better humanity? And I think a lot of us are in that process of creating a better humanity. What's going on the planet right now, breaking out of old systems and creating new ones, because we do, you know, we own our own soul. Like, we are the ones in control of that. And then the vessel that we're in, the body. So we've got the voice of the soul, we've got the vessel, and then, you know, we've got that connection in the alignment. And it's such a, you know, for me, it took a fair amount of time to get to that thought process, that mind shift you were talking about, because I've had so much in the background that I kind of had to break out of and ask questions about. And how do I feel? How do I practice that? What does that actually mean to me in the community that I'm in, or that I choose to be in?
Yeah. And I loved the concept of the different levels of vibration. David R. Hawking's got some awesome books that talk about that there's certain levels of vibration, mindset, anything from anger to, you know, compassion at the other end of the spectrum. And then some add to our life energies, others detract from them, that we're better served by focusing on the ones that elevate our not only our consciousness, but our life energy and our growth. One of the yogis that I follow says that we're here to evolve.
Right. I believe that. Sure. And it looks different for everyone.
You
know, we are.
And each path is different. Yeah. And everything is fine. What's important is we recognize when the path or road we're going down isn't serving us. So a nudge for that that comes from Marshall Goldsmith is, I'll paraphrase it, but is what got you here going to get you to where you want to be?
Right.
And that's not always the case. Yeah, what I have done may have been successful to got me to point B, but if I want to get to point C, I might have to shift and choose another journey and path.
Yeah. Oh, or it's just time. It's part of that seasons of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at, health, just basic health, I'm looking at, what age group you're in and your constitution, the health of your body over time, and how to go in and either rebuild things or cleanse things or shift, the quality of health. And I think that's true in all aspects, because sometimes we just get a little heavy in one area. Maybe we've only focused on our body for 20 years, and the mind, soul, or spirit piece are like over here. And you're like, oh, if I, and that
if
changes.
we ignore one, it's at the peril of the other. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Back to leveling out those buckets, whether it be vitality, contribution, or connection, or body, mind, spirit bucket. Yeah.
Right. Right. And the map of consciousness, I think, what an amazing concept, and how we can use it every day. Sometimes I'll just put that up on the refrigerator so that everyone in the household can look at it, when they wake up or whatever throughout the day, and be like, well, where am I? Sometimes that's just the exercise in my practice when I give people homework. It's just like, where are you on a regular basis? If you were just to look at the chart and then just kind of map that out over the course of a week, if you're constantly angry, we're going to find out why. One of the things I absolutely learned in cancer nutrition in that process was, you can do all the right things over here, but if you are not working in this area, that wholeness, that healing process is hindered.
Yeah, all those healthy foods and whether aren't going to serve me when my mindset has got me consumed with anger or rage, because that totally shifts my body chemistry, not for the better. And the health impacts of that could be just as detrimental, if not more than, not eating healthy foods. Yeah.
Absolutely. Our cell vibration is impacted by so many more things. And that cellular level of health, I think the health and wellness industry does it a disservice, because you don't always realize. I know it's gotten better in the last decade, looking at cellular health and what that means. But it's so important. And from that, we're looking at what's happening at the atomic level. Now, that's not something.
Genetic level, yeah.
Genetic, yeah. Yeah. And that, trails back to what's happening with our DNA right now, which is kind of interesting that the junk DNA is kind of waking up. In some
and impacting future generations, because we now know that the stressors that we experience literally rewire the next generation. There's a classic experiment involving mice that were shocked electrically when they're trying to eat food whenever they smelled wintergreen. And they learn very quickly, don't eat the food if you smell wintergreen, because it's going to be painful. Without doing that any further, that behavior was passed down 6 generations out, that the offspring, never having experienced that, would avoid eating food if they smelled wintergreen. It's nature's way of passing down survival mechanisms to the next generation. So when we start thinking about what's happened in my ancestry history of that's impacting me, not only from a behavioral point, but also we now know that food that my ancestors ate 6 generations back or whatever will impact pathology or health in my biology. So it's not just impacting us; it's the future generations when we make certain choices.
That's amazing, and the generational aspect. The first thing I saw about that was the Weston Price's work Now it's just physically. That wasn't necessarily on the mental, emotional side of that, or the learned behavior. And you know how it takes like 3 generations sometimes, most times, based on their studies. Now, I don't know if that can be sped up or not now, just because of the technologies that we have. But that's primarily like white flour and sugar. So imagine what we have available now and what that's doing to us at that level. But
Yeah.
it's amazing. It's
And anybody that is in childbearing years and considering having children, certain should be, you know, a part of their mindset.
of course, absolutely. And that's always a part. That's why I love, you know, for what I do and what I've developed over the years as a practice for my clients is really incorporating all of it. Now, not everybody is going to walk in the door and say, yeah, I'm doing it all. But there are always things that are available to be looking at. If we're just working on diet and movement and stress reduction, then we're always going to put in some of the things that are going to support the mental and the emotional side of those things, because the results are so much better. And boy, if you're already doing the work, why not add on the super booster? Because it moves along so much faster. Not that we're in a hurry, but people can get stuck in that. I still see people worrying about, you know, in this particular time, I would think, you know, immune health, cellular health, being kind of in right mind and, you know, right spirit. We're still stuck on eating macros, maybe losing 10 pounds. Not that that's not important if that's your focus, but there has to be a point where you progress above that and grow into what it is, listening to what your body's asking you for instead of this very yo-yo aspect. And that's a mental, in my opinion, that's a mental mindset or mind shift, because we're stuck there for a reason. And that could have been generations of teaching how to eat or what to do.
Right.
But
Absolutely.
yeah,
So,
it's interesting how we start with those 6 natural doctors, and you know, at the beginning, and then you can go through this incredible process that we've just talked about, you know, all this time, and still end up with that basic 6 natural doctors that will, in each of its own little containers, will provide you the opportunity to be in the best.
Yeah, and the key point there is natural. Nature has a tremendous wisdom when it comes to healing, health, and so forth. And modern man, or modern humans, have distanced themselves from that in so many ways. Yeah.
Yeah, we're complex. We want to make it really challenging. And, you know, over the years, it's been interesting because I was so excited to learn in, you know, the depth of the functionality, endocrine system, neurology. Like, these are all areas of my study that I'm just so excited about, the psyche-soma connection. But I got to the point where I realized, oh, well, the simplest things are the best. So what we started with here is actually the best, you know, medicine up here for almost everybody. You know, my advanced cancer and my advanced athlete is almost identical in their profiles sometimes, which sounds crazy, but you know, you look at what the body is going through, these stressors, these things that are
Absolutely.
happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the same root causes are there.
Yeah.
And the emphasis is on learning. So, kind of to bring us to closure, I'd nudge our listeners to learn and be aware of the environments that you're in, and or create and master them for greater success, health, and wellness and fulfillment. So where can people find more about your Live, Love, and Grow program and all your other offerings?
So you can find me at janellelynn.com. I'm also on social media under WellFitRx, and just, you know, reach out, send me a note, say hello, let me know what you're doing, because I always love to hear what's going on outside as well. So super exciting. I think I'm on all the platforms, but under Janelle Lynn or under WellFitRx, you can find out, what's going on with us there. So
And I'll
come
post some
into
of those
Instagram.
I'll post some of those in the show notes for people as well. So, well, it's been an absolute delight talking with you and reconnecting again, Janelle. And I would nudge our audience to reach out and connect with Janelle and
come in and grab a 1-minute moment.
Yeah, there you go.
Love to hear your feedback on that. Thank you so much, Keith. I really appreciate being here. It's been a wonderful time spent together. And I'm getting ready. I got a new book to add to my reading.
Okay, and I look forward to you sharing some in my direction as well. Take care.